Hi everyone, my name is Morgan Pike. The topic that I chose for the Civic Issues project for this course was LGBTQ discrimination. To start off, some background on this topic. Unfortunately, for many people, discrimination is an everyday reality. Its definition is the unfair or prejudicial treatment of people and groups based on characteristics such as race, gender, age, or sexual orientation. Discrimination is rooted from people's implicit biases, which are formed through experiences that we've had growing up and people that we were influenced by. So this could be parents or guardians, educators, peers, coaches, etc. So we form these implicit biases, which further causes us to stereotype and further causes us to discriminate. So groups that are discriminated against are those who are not part of what society deems as the dominant culture. So this, like I mentioned previously with the definition, can really range from many different things, but whatever society does not think is what the majority is a part of, typically, if you do not follow suit in that path, you are discriminated against in some way. So why LGBTQ discrimination occurs in the United States? So when I was doing my research, I found that some states and districts in the country lack policies that affirm and support the LGBTQ youth, which does not protect them from discrimination. So what I mean by this is that some states, like Texas and Alabama are two of the group, do not allow for any type of homophobic talk. In their classrooms, everything is really cut dry, binary model, heterosexual, anything like that, but nothing to do with any type of gender diversity. It's just not spoken about, and you can actually get in trouble for speaking about it. So because of this, states ignore the fact that transgender and non-conforming students have become more represented in society, which further causes them to ignore the needs that the LGBTQ community desires. So by them ignoring this population, which makes up some of the school's student body, they're kind of just pushing it off like it's not important, and further causes discrimination because they are looked down upon and simply ignored. So with schools ignoring this, it does not provide a safe space for these LGBTQ students to learn, and their health and well-being is definitely put in harm here because of this constant internal struggle that they're having for not being accepted in their community. So specifically, the grade band I looked at was middle school students. So what they face with LGBTQ discrimination is as follows. I looked at indirect and direct applications here. So for indirect, in middle school, it's a time where students are trying to find out what niche they belong to, what kind of friends they want to have, what kind of activities they like doing, and there's a lot of social pressure to try and fit in to groups that you may or may not want to be a part of. So with this, students that are a part of this community tend to struggle because they feel as though it's harder to be accepted by their peers. So also, they lack support from their family and peers. Many times, students are afraid to come out to their parents or their friends because they're worried about how they're going to react. And typically, some students have mentioned that their parents are not in support of it, which is very hard for students to go through. Teachers and peers having prejudice towards the LGBTQ community forces them to treat them differently. So this is based on implicit biases and negative feelings that they have towards this community, which forces them, or it causes unjust and unfair treatment in the classroom. They're treated differently than others just because of their gender identity. And additionally, there are limited resources for this community. The demographic of teachers and counselors tend to there's not a lot of LGBTQ representation there. School libraries and school computers all kind of lack information on these topics, and it makes it very hard for this community of students to learn more about themselves or other people like them, or some things they might be going through, because many schools just don't have the resources to support them on what they need. Some direct applications are restricting bathroom and locker room access for LGBTQ students, limiting participation in extracurricular activities. So this is stuff like at gym. Some students are not comfortable with participating, and they don't have any other avenues for these students, and it affects their participation in grades in school. Reducing other forms of expression, and then peers and teachers using homophobic slurs, discouraging same-sex relationships, and regularly misgendering their LGBTQ peers and students. This is something that happens a lot in school, and whether it's on purpose or on accident, misgendering students happens a lot, and also not using the correct pronouns or their preferred names are direct applications of discrimination in middle schools. So some ethical strategies to provide support for this group is as follows. So the first one is repealing outdated laws and policies. So like I said, many states are not supporting the LGBTQ community. They do not allow for discussion of it in school. But I think that this is very old school and really not up to date because of how much of a progressive movement this has been. This needs to be something that is taught in schools, because there's such a big barrier in some schools for these students, and it's not creating a safe space or environment for them. And as educators, we should be able to talk about current issues and current things that are going on in society, and ignoring the fact that these students have a different gender identity that doesn't necessarily follow the dominant norm needs to be addressed. Second, giving students a say. So this was, I took this from last week's module that discussed giving students the driver's seat. And I think that this is important because when trying to figure out different things to do to support these students, people make assumptions and they kind of guess as to what these students would benefit from. But most of the time, those decisions are not being made by someone who's also a part of the LGBTQ community, and they might not be accurate assumptions. So I think by giving students a say on the decision-making, at least some of the decision-making that goes on in schools to help support them is really important, because they're the ones that are going to be affected by these decisions, and they know what would better impact and make their learning experience better for their group because they're a part of it. And lastly is breaking down stereotypes. So implicit biases are really hard sometimes to find and break down, but I think the only way for discrimination to lessen in schools is by figuring out kind of what these predispositions some of us have, and being able to unpack them so that we can further support our students. Because everyone has different characteristics about themselves, and society tends to pick apart kind of whatever they want that doesn't fit the norm, and someone's gender is just another characteristic to what makes up their whole entire body and personality and whatnot. And we should be just breaking these stereotypes down to be able to better support our students. The curriculum implementation that I found or decided to use was the following 5 things. So the first one is educating staff, LGBTQ inclusive curriculum, LGBTQ organizations, preferred names/pronouns in school facilities. So for educating the staff, I think that professional development is something that is really needed by all school districts across the nation to use to educate their staff on LGBTQ issues in their community. And I think that by doing this, it will help to educate the teachers on knowing the correct vocabulary and terminology to use when discussing gender identity with their students and knowing how to properly refer to them and the groups that they are a part of. Learning about proper gender-neutral phrases to use when addressing the class. A lot of people say, okay, boys and girls, are we ready to go? Or, all right, guys, like, it's time to move on to the next thing. So those are gendered terms, and avoiding those to make sure that everyone in the class feels like they fit in and are a part of the community happens when you use phrases that are gender neutral, like everyone, or some people in elementary use friends, folks, stuff like that. And the last one is investigating one's implicit biases that further create stereotypes and prejudices. So I already mentioned this, but kind of unpacking your own implicit biases and ideals and figuring out how you can break those down to reduce the amount of stereotypes and prejudices that you have. The next one is LGBTQ inclusive curriculum. So this kind of just talks about the representation of the LGBTQ community in things that we are teaching our students. So books that might discuss LGBTQ topics or historical figures that have been a part of the LGBTQ community, stuff like that, just showing representation in our classrooms for these group of students is really important because we tend to avoid doing stuff like this, and it shows our students when we implement a gender diverse curriculum that we are respecting them and their gender, and it makes them feel as though they are welcomed in the classroom. So I sort of just talked about the SEL connection, but representation in the classroom is really helpful. It shows your students that you are aware of them and that they mean something to you in their classroom. Additionally, I think that it's important to talk about LGBTQ issues in the community with your whole class because a lot of students and educators are uneducated on these topics, and it's important to be able to spread awareness about things that this group is going through because most of the time they will have peers that are a part of this group, and it helps to spread awareness and build relationships with students based on certain struggles that they might be going through and kind of an appreciation for respecting one another. The next is LGBTQ organizations. So this is something like an alliance club where students of a community like the LGBTQ can come together. They have an educator, which is kind of like the spokesperson, the one that organizes everything, which allows them to have a role model. So sometimes many students part of the LGBT community are they don't have anyone to talk to at home or sometimes even at school about things they're going through. So a club like this provides an open space for those students and gives them a role model to look up to. And it creates a safe space for these students who are trying to become comfortable with themselves. And I think it's a great way to build a community within your school. Next is preferred name and pronouns in the student database. So I think that there should be a section on every single student's information section of their own login or whatever. So when you're taking attendance, you have everyone's name there. So that their biological name obviously is in the system, but I think that there should be another section that says their preferred name and the pronouns that they want to go by. And this goes for all students, not just the students who are part of the LGBTQ community, but I think it's something that we should have to ask our students at the beginning of the year, and they go into that database so that it takes away from educators making assumptions based on physical features or how someone talks on their gender, because a lot of times students are misgendered, and I think this would just take away that. sorry, I can't think of the word. That would take away from the misgendering and students becoming uncomfortable. So the SEL connection here is that by doing this, it shows respect for all your students, and it shows them that you care about their success in the classroom and that you care about respecting them and their identity. So this protects students from psychological and emotional harm when you show them this respect, and that you want to make sure that they're comfortable in your space. The last one is accommodating school facilities. So this does not just include bathrooms and locker rooms, but things that are gender neutral need to be offered in schools to be able to accommodate to all of the students' needs. So we have girls and boys bathrooms, but some people don't fit into those two genders. So there needs to be something that give LGBTQ students the right to use the facilities in which they feel most comfortable in. And I think that this is something that the LGBTQ community of students should have a say in, because it's something that's directly affecting them every single day. And by giving them choice, it allows them to feel as though that they belong and that they're more comfortable in the educational setting. So in conclusion, I think that the social and emotional health of the LGBTQ community is at risk every single day in schools because of how public school systems are constructed. By implementing these ethical strategies that focus on altering the curriculum, which is something that is common across the nation, is one of the ways that we can minimize the amount of struggling LGBTQ youth and maximize their educational experience by being accepted by their peers and educators, which further creates a supportive and welcoming learning environment for them. So this group of students across the nation struggles every day with feeling accepted, whether it's at school or whether it's at home. And there's a lot of education that needs to be done for educators and also for students to be able to properly respect and welcome this group into schools and make them feel safe and that they aren't ostracized every single day. So I think by doing some of the stuff that I mentioned throughout this presentation would help to provide that for them. Here are my references, and thank you for everyone who listened. I can't wait to listen to the rest of you guys'. Thanks.